If it's Monday, after the daring and deadly raid that brought home 4 Israeli hostages, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is back in the region as a ceasefire deal in this 8-month-long war now seems even less likely. Plus, it's in the jury's hands. Deliberations beginning just moments ago in Hunter Biden's criminal trial, and a verdict could come at any moment. That as the president's son faces multiple charges tied to gun possession while using drugs. And former President Donald Trump meets virtually with his New York City probation officer as he hits the campaign trail, rails against the verdict, and vows vengeance against his political enemies. And welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Aaron Gilchrist in Washington. We are learning more today about how Israel rescued 4 hostages this weekend from Gaza and about the casualties in that daring daytime operation. Over the weekend, emotional scenes of celebration and relief as those 4 hostages returned home to Israel, hugging their families after being held hostage for more than 240 days. The Hamas-run health ministry is saying at least 274 Palestinian civilians were killed during the Israeli raid. And while Israel acknowledges there were civilian casualties, they estimate that number to be less than 100. The IDF says all 4 hostages were being held in an apartment building that also housed civilian families. And a U.S. official familiar with the matter says the U.S. provided intel to support the rescue operation. And today, NBC News is also exclusively reporting that the Biden administration is considering a potential unilateral deal with Hamas to secure the release of American hostages in Gaza, as well as the bodies of Americans killed during the October 7th attack. Now, when pressed about it by NBC's Andrea Mitchell today in Egypt, Secretary of State Blinken did not deny that report.
My number one priority as Secretary of State is to ensure the well-being of Americans who are in harm's way anywhere in the world, including those who are being unjustly detained or who are being held hostage. The best way, the most effective way to get everyone home, including the American hostages, is through this proposal, is through the ceasefire deal that's on the table right now.
Wouldn't indirect talks for the Americans at least bring those Americans home, or possibly? Again,
my top priority, always, to bring Americans home. And because of that, the most effective way to do that, to achieve that, to actually get them home, is through the proposal that's on the table.
Blinken is in Israel now, where he met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, reiterating support for the current ceasefire proposal, just one day after Israel's war cabinet began falling apart, with centrist Minister Benny Gantz resigning, accusing Netanyahu of playing politics with the war. Joining me now, our team of reporters, Matt Bradley in Jerusalem and Courtney Cuby is at the Pentagon for us today. So, Matt, I'll start with you here. There are some Israelis who've been pressing their government to focus more on rescuing hostages and less on destroying Hamas. What more do we know about the operation this weekend, and how is it resonating with the Israeli people?
Well, obviously, it's being seen here in Israel as a resoundingly successful operation. Among the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, they're calling it a brutal massacre. And you mentioned those casualty figures. They are enormous, considering there were 4 hostages who were freed. So, you know, when you're talking about the outlook, the situation going forward, you know, Israelis have increasingly seen the 2 goals of Benjamin Netanyahu in Gaza to be at odds with each other: freeing Hamas, freeing the hostages and defeating Hamas. And you were talking about this just a moment ago. When you have both of them together, fighting and freeing the hostages, Benjamin Netanyahu and his allies in his very right-wing government are now going to be able to point to this, and we're already seeing this, as the only solution, that continuing the war, not reaching a ceasefire, is the best way to free the hostages, that they can have their cake and eat it too. By continuing the war, they will accomplish both goals. And as you mentioned before, in the introduction, you know, that kind of makes any peace negotiations that are now being shepherded by Secretary Blinken here in the Middle East even further apart, even less likely than they were before, and they were not likely before. Aaron?
Matt, I want to go back to this number of casualties here. We do have the Hamas-run Ministry of Health saying that more than 270 Palestinians were killed during that operation. Has Israel had much to say about the civilian deaths here? And also, how are Arab countries reacting to this weekend's operation?
Well, this has been considered outrageous by most Arab countries. You know, they're not celebrating like the Israelis, even those who have diplomatic relations. And, you know, this is consistent. The same kind of noises we've been hearing from neighboring Arab countries and Muslim countries throughout the world. And really, a lot of leaders in European countries, advocacy organizations, United Nations officials, all outraged at the death toll, not just from what we saw in Nusayrat refugee camp over the weekend, freeing those 4 hostages, but also now we've seen the death toll, according to the Hamas-run Ministry of Health in the Gaza Strip, topping 37,000 people. Now, even if that is an exaggeration, and the Israelis have consistently said that those numbers are inflated, they are still sky-high numbers, really, no matter how you slice it. And that is what we're seeing and hearing from the Palestinians here.
And Matt, you insert the U.S. here. We have Secretary Blinken back in Israel today, his 8th visit to the region since the fighting began in Gaza. What are your biggest takeaways from the meeting that the Secretary is had today in Israel?
Well, I mean, you said it right there, Aaron, his 8th visit in 8 months of fighting. And that's not even counting the visits that we've seen from the CIA director and other diplomats who have also been pushing negotiations and a peace proposal. This is an elusive goal, trying to bring these two parties together. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, it's probably more elusive now than it was before. Anthony Blinken is going to have his work cut out for him. He's been pushing this idea that Israel has already signed on to this proposal, and it's only waiting for Hamas's signature. Now, this is something that we kind of heard from the administration a couple of weeks ago when it was Joe Biden himself who put forward what he called Israel's proposal to not only make a pause in the conflict, but to use that pause to discuss a permanent ceasefire and to free more hostages and Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. You know, now, ever since we heard that from Biden, the Israelis have been backtracking on that and pouring cold water on the notion that they have already acceded to this deal and that all that's left is Hamas's signature. We've already been hearing from Benjamin Netanyahu just yesterday kind of saying the same thing, that they are not going to be entertaining any peace deal that doesn't mean the end or the complete dismantling of Hamas. That is something that is a non-starter for them to talk about a ceasefire, or not to talk about, excuse me, to agree to a permanent ceasefire and a withdrawal of Israeli troops without first totally defeating Hamas to their satisfaction. Hamas, of course, isn't going to sign on to a proposal that involves their complete destruction. So once again, we find ourselves at an impasse. This is a non-starter for both sides.
Leaving us to wonder what next here. And Courtney Cubie, I'll bring you in for that. Take us through your new reporting on this idea of the U.S. doing a solo hostage deal. Why does the administration feel like it needs a backup plan at this point?
So for all the reasons that Matt's just been laying out to us, Aaron, the fact that there is growing pessimism about this current ceasefire deal that's on the table actually coming to a place of an agreement here. And you know, Matt laid out the fact that even this operation over the weekend has increased the pessimism that the Israelis and Hamas will be able to come to the table and agree to some sort of a deal. Now, according to the officials who we spoke with, they said that if, in fact, this ceasefire deal does fall apart, there has been discussion about the U.S. negotiating unilaterally with Hamas. Now, what this would mean is the U.S. working through an intermediary, most likely Qatar, would be dealing directly with Hamas to try to get the remaining 8 American hostages released from Hamas control. And the question is, what can the U.S. offer? We've seen some of the specifics about the deal that's on the table, with Hamas wanting a large number of prisoners freed, with calling for a ceasefire. Well, these are things that the U.S. can't directly deliver. So it's not really clear what the U.S. could provide in exchange for these Americans. But the officials we spoke with said Hamas could have some incentive to broker this deal, to make this deal with the U.S. because of a couple of things. Number one, it could damage the relationship between the United States and Israel, one that has remained relatively solid since October 7th and frankly in the years before that. But even with everything that's happened since October 7th, the United States, really specifically the Biden administration, have really stuck with Israel. A deal like this, a unilateral deal, could damage that relationship, and it could simultaneously damage Benjamin Netanyahu domestically. So for those reasons, the officials say it is possible that Hamas would make this deal, Aaron.
So, Courtney, this reporting from you and Monica Alba and Carol Lee has been out there now for several hours. Has there been much reaction from families of American hostages to this reporting that you all have done?
We have. We've heard from some of the families who have said that they would be in favor of this. The reality, Aaron, I mean, look, we've been watching these pictures over the last 48 hours or so of these hostages who've just been rescued over the weekend from Gaza, and you can see their condition. We're starting to hear these harrowing tales of what they endured during their time in captivity, and the families of those more than 100 people who are still being held are desperate to get their loved ones out. And we have heard from them today saying, look, if it takes a direct negotiation here with Hamas to get our family out, we're for it.
Courtney, I'm curious, too. I mean, we heard the perspective from Matt overseas, but we know it's been 10 days now since President Biden gave that speech. He laid out that three-phase ceasefire proposal that he said was from the Israelis. From the sources you've been able to talk to and what you've been able to learn here in Washington, are the sides any closer to a real agreement or seeing something come to fruition?
Yeah, despite the optimism that we continue to hear out of some officials here in the Biden administration, we don't get the sense that this is any closer to an actual deal that we're going to see come to fruition anytime soon. But as we know, we're seeing the video of Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He is there. Matt mentioned that CIA Director Bill Burns has also been back and forth to the region. I don't even know how many times at this point. American officials are desperately trying to come to a deal here, but the reality is it just doesn't seem like the sides are coming together. And, you know, I mean, one of the other issues that we've really been hearing a lot about that the U.S. is continuing to press is this idea of Israel allowing more humanitarian aid in, to allow the crossings to open and trucks to get in, so that some of the other pictures that we've been seeing, including the people starving in Gaza, that some of that could also be taken care of. I suspect that's going to be something else that Secretary Blinken talks about during his visit, Aaron.
All right, Courtney Kube for us at the Pentagon, Matt Bradley for us as well in Israel. Thank you both. I want to turn now to Ambassador Dennis Ross, former U.S. envoy to the Middle East and an NBC News foreign affairs analyst. Ambassador, we appreciate you making some time for us today. Obviously, the rescue of these 4 hostages over the weekend is some good news. It's welcome news. How do you think, though, that operation and the reported 200-plus deaths will impact the ceasefire efforts that have been ongoing for months now?
You know, I think that it may have an initial, it may initially be something that doesn't contribute to doing a deal, but I would be a little bit hesitant to draw a definitive conclusion. You know, in the immediate aftermath within Israel, there's a sense, look, this is amazing, fantastic. It's a sort of morale boost here. But there's also a reality that 6 hostages out of the 251 who were seized have been freed by Israeli military action. There's very little prospect that you could recreate what we saw over the weekend. Maybe there could be another rescue or 2, but again, the numbers will be very small. And what we saw in this particular rescue operation was what the Israelis had to do was to fight their way out. You know, the aim of the Israeli military was to get in, get out with as little notice as possible, because if there was a big firefight, then you were putting at risk the very lives of the people you were trying to save. So it wasn't the Israelis who were triggering this firefight. It was Hamas that tried to kill both the Israeli rescuers and the people who were being rescued. And that's what produced the outcome where you had what may be large numbers of civilians. Clear there were large numbers of civilians killed. The actual number may not be so clear, but it's clear there were large numbers who were killed. And if Hamas wasn't trying to stop the rescue operation, those numbers would look very different. In the near term, I suspect, as I said, here, there's a sense of being buoyed. Hamas is probably embarrassed by what happened. So in the immediate aftermath of that, I don't believe that you're going to see a greater likelihood of a ceasefire deal being done. But if you ask me a week from now, will we still be in the same place we are right now? I wouldn't be so sure.
Well, what gives you that feeling, though? I mean, you point out the idea that Hamas might be embarrassed. What incentive do they have in the near term to go back to the drawing board to say, oh, yes, we'll take the deal, even though we have this new operation behind us?
Well, a couple things. One is the Israelis are still operating in Rafah, and they're also operating within central Gaza. One of the factors that influences Yahya Sinwar is how close is the Israeli military to him, and does he therefore have an interest in getting a reprieve? That's number one. That's one factor. The second is okay, maybe there will be other Israeli operations that we plan. The last thing Hamas wants to do is have other rescue operations that, once again, rob them of what they see as being these bargaining chips, these assets that they have. So I wouldn't conclude that necessarily from Hamas standpoint, everything is in a sense off the table. Number three, I suspect that they will be under increasing pressure from Qatar and from Egypt, precisely because the Secretary of State is in the region. So this is not a static situation. I think we shouldn't draw conclusions based on this operation and say, gee, now it looks like it's impossible. I don't conclude that it's impossible. Having said that, when Yahya Sinwar is the arbiter of whether or not you can do a hostage deal, it's pretty hard to predict that you're going to see one.
What do you think this does for Benjamin Netanyahu? We know that he's faced criticism from Israelis, from hostage families, for not doing enough to get the hostages home at different points during this conflict. Does this rescue operation change that? Is he going to see domestic pressure that he's been facing ease after the rescue of these 4 hostages, or does this embolden him to do more militarily?
Yeah, I kind of doubt it. What is going to affect him more is the makeup of his government, with Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot gone. They were, in a sense, a moderating influence. They limited the influence of the most far-right elements of his coalition, Ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. They will be pressing for more military action. They will be pressing for more rescue operations. But this was a rescue operation that was rehearsed over and over again for several weeks. They had intelligence that they had for a while. Hard to replicate that on the one hand. On the other hand, it sends a signal that there may be some military options. Having said all that, you're going to see hostage families whose family members are living in impossible conditions. We know the numbers that are still surviving are going down. That will continue to be a source of pressure on the prime minister. He can't wish that away. And the reality is that he still needs to be able to produce when it comes to the hostages. You know, there were very large demonstrations on Saturday night after the rescue operation, very large demonstrations. Most of the people in these demonstrations basically are saying you can't say we have total victory if the vast majority of the hostages don't come back alive. That will continue to be a source of pressure on him. How he manages his new coalition, that will be a factor as well. And he's going to be under more pressure from the far right. He's going to have to figure out a way to sort of maneuver given that pressure.
Before I let you go, I do want to ask you about Secretary Blinken. As we noted, he's back in the Middle East for this 8th visit since the war began. What do you think he needs to be able to come back home with? What does success look like for him on a trip, the 8th trip into this region, to try to make some change?
It's an excellent question because the circumstances right now, as we were just saying, don't lend themselves necessarily to any kind of immediate breakthrough. I suspect, what would be an achievement would be a resumption of indirect negotiations between the Israelis and Hamas that are brokered effectively by Egypt and Qatar. The issue right now is that you don't have any indirect negotiations underway. There was no effort at brokering or mediating the ceasefire deal. So I suspect one of the things that he will be hoping to do will be to see if it's possible to get those indirect negotiations back on track. A second objective will be to get more understanding over what could be a day after strategy if you get to the point where, in fact, you move on a process where there could be a hostage deal. I would also say if there isn't a hostage deal, you still need a strategy for what you're going to do on the ground. I think discussions on what Arab states are prepared to do under what circumstances and with what understanding with the Israelis, I think that will also be a part of what he's trying to get done on this trip.
Okay. Ambassador Dennis Ross, we appreciate your time and your perspective today. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Well, coming up, we are live outside the courthouse where the jury in Hunter Biden's criminal gun trial is now deliberating what we heard in closing arguments today as we await a verdict that could come at any moment. Plus, the rise of far right in Europe. We're tracking the fallout of this weekend's dramatic elections and what it means for the future of the continent and for the U.S. You're watching Meet the Press Now. And welcome back. After just 1 week and 13 witnesses, the jury is deliberating right now in Hunter Biden's gun trial. The president's son faces 3 counts tied to possession of a gun while using narcotics. The defense rested its case this morning without calling Hunter Biden to the stand. During closing arguments this afternoon, his lawyer Abby Lowell argued Biden did not knowingly lie on a federal gun purchase form, saying he did not believe he was a user or addicted to drugs at the time. The prosecution reminded the jury that none of the charges require them to prove Hunter Biden was using drugs when he purchased the gun, but also highlighted evidence that he was using drugs in the days and weeks surrounding that purchase. Joining me now from outside the courthouse is NBC News Justice and Intelligence Correspondent Ken Delany, as well as Paul Callan, former prosecutor and former criminal defense attorney as well. Ken, I'll start with you here. The prosecution started today by bringing back one of its earlier witnesses. Talk to us about why that was and what we heard from her.
That's right, Aaron. Her name is Erica Jensen. She's an FBI agent. She was the prosecution's first witness in the trial. They used her to bring in lots of evidence gleaned from Hunter Biden's iCloud and laptop, including text messages and phone records. And they called her as a rebuttal witness to remind the jury that there was lots of evidence of Hunter Biden dealing with drug dealers, potentially purchasing drugs the day before and the day after he bought that gun on October 12th, 2018. Some of that evidence had already been admitted, including a text where he said he was dealing with a person named Mookie in Wilmington, and a text 2 days after he bought the gun where he said he was smoking crack. But then there was new evidence that she discussed, including geolocation records that placed him at a 7-Eleven. And she also introduced an excerpt from his memoir where he talked about buying drugs at 7-Eleven. So it was powerful evidence. It was the last thing that the jury heard in terms of testimony before closing arguments.
Ken, we've also seen members of the Biden family, including the First Lady, in attendance throughout this trial, again today, obviously. What was their reaction as they were listening in to the closing arguments today?
Well, first I should say that the lead prosecutor made an issue of it. He began his closing argument by noting the prominent members of the Biden family in the room, told the jury, you may know these people from the news, but that is not evidence and no one is above the law. They listened and watched raptly as they have throughout this trial. But I have to say, my colleague Mike Memley, who knows the Biden family well and has covered Joe Biden for many, many years, it struck him that there were some tense moments as that trial, as the arguments came to a conclusion. There were some very long faces in terms of the First Lady and other members of the Biden family. They did not seem pleased with how this trial has gone.
Ken, before I let you go, I do want to ask you, just sort of help us understand what happens next here. What are the next steps now that the jury has the case, and what comes after the verdict?
Right. So assuming there is a verdict and not a hung jury, if it's an acquittal, that's the end of it. Hunter Biden walks out of this courthouse and he's done with this case. If he's convicted, obviously the judge has an option to incarcerate him immediately, but that is extremely unlikely. He's got no prior criminal record. This is not a crime of violence. And so what's likely to happen in that event is that she would schedule a sentencing date. Usually that's 2 to 3 months from now. And during that time, there would be a pre-sentence report written by the probation department. It's confidential. It would involve an interview with Hunter Biden, all kinds of factors about his life and his circumstances that would go into the sentencing. The sentencing, by the way, is going to be determined by sentencing guidelines. There's a maximum 10-year penalty in this case, but that's not going to be the sentence here. If there is even prison time, it'll be likely to be less than a year. Aaron.
All right, Ken Delany for us live outside the courthouse there in Wilmington, Delaware. Ken, thank you. Paul Callan, I want to turn to you now and talk about this a little bit more. We saw Hunter Biden's lawyers having this real focus of his defense on the idea that he did not knowingly lie on this background check form. Is a defense that appears to be based on a word, knowingly, semantics, for example, is that something that is likely to be a strong defense that could resonate with the jury?
You know, Aaron, it's not a great defense at all. Whenever you hear attorneys focusing on the definition of a word in the charge or reasonable doubt, as opposed to just saying my client is innocent and the evidence has clearly proven that, it's the sign that there's a very weak case on behalf of the defense in the case. This is a tough case for the defense. We have a Yale-educated lawyer in Hunter Biden saying he didn't understand, or the defense is that he didn't understand that the question on the form he filled out, when it referred to addiction, was referring to his own behavior. And I think that's an uphill battle. But on the other hand, the Bidens are well liked in Delaware, and the jury could look at this simply as a political move to embarrass the president. So it's not out of the question that he gets acquitted in the case, but I think it's an uphill battle for the defense.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the prosecution here, though, because the burden of proof is always on the prosecution, right? In the closing arguments, we heard the lawyer for the government remind the jury that they don't have to prove that Hunter used drugs on the day that he purchased the gun. Help us understand that part of the argument, your analysis of that. Does that make things easier for the prosecution?
Well, it does make things easier for the prosecution because, remember, the thing that he checked off on the ATF form that you have to fill out when you purchase a handgun was that he was not a user or addicted to either unlawful substances or controlled substances. Now, if you look up the dictionary definition of addiction, it means a compulsive or psychological propensity to continue using a substance. It doesn't mean you have to be using that substance at every moment in time, such as when he's filling out the form. And I think the defense in the case has been, well, he was an addict, but he didn't recognize himself as an addict at the time. Because remember, one of the devastating pieces of evidence in this case is Hunter Biden's own book, where he says that he was an addict during this 2-year period of time. So his very own words, and by the way, because he did an Audible book, they even have him saying those words out loud as if he had testified in the trial that he was addicted to drugs during the 2-year period around 2018. So it's a tough fact pattern for the defense to deal with.
Well, let me ask you a few more things about the defense here. We saw the defense push back pretty hard on Hallie Biden's testimony. She was called by the prosecution. She suggested that they suggested that Hunter told her to find the gun and also told her to file a police report after it was dumped. Does redefining that testimony at this point give Hunter Biden more credibility? Does it risk highlighting that he was sort of more involved here?
Hard to say, because you have to remember that part of her testimony also was that she became addicted to crack herself as a result of her relationship with him. So many of the women who were called in the case were very harmful to him in terms of the testimony. I think with respect, though, to the gun charge, that testimony would seem to indicate that he hadn't planned to use the gun on any person in particular, and that at least the jury will think that nobody in Delaware was endangered by anything that he did during that time period other than himself. And of course, the big picture, when you step way back on this case, and maybe the jury will do this, is that he hasn't been addicted to drugs for a very long time now, for at least a few years, and he seems to have straightened his life out. This kind of charge usually is lodged against an active addict who presents a danger to society. So I think they're hoping that the jury will look at the big picture and not the details of the evidence.
Well, let me ask you about that. We just learned that the jury has been sent home for the day. 4:30 was the time we understood that was going to be happening. So they do have the case now, though. They've been able to start at least some level of deliberation on this. How soon do you think we might see a verdict in a case like this with evidence presented in the way that you've just laid out? Is this fairly straightforward legally?
Well, it is straightforward legally, and I would be very surprised if we don't have a verdict tomorrow in the case. I mean, it could go for a third day, but I would think by day's end tomorrow, the jury would have been through all of the facts. Now, the only thing you can't really measure is whether there's a possibility of a hung jury, and that is if there are 2 or 3 jurors who really don't want to convict him and they're willing to hold out against the other jurors, then jury deliberations could go for a longer period of time.
All right. Paul Callan with us today. Paul, we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
Coming up next, Congresswoman Nancy Mace is in the fight for her political life. Will her vote to oust Speaker McCarthy cost her her seat in Congress? We'll explain that for you next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. And welcome back. Whether you call it revenge, payback, or just hard-nosed politics, tomorrow's Republican primary for South Carolina's 1st congressional district is shaping up to be a dramatic proxy fight between incumbent Nancy Mace and Kevin McCarthy, the former Speaker of the House, who she helped oust last fall. NBC's Vitali has more from the Palmetto State.
Around Charleston, South Carolina, shade isn't just thrown by the Palmettos.
Check out just a few. This is just a sampling of Catherine Templeton's lies.
Our current congressman goes to Washington and votes however she wants.
This race to oust Nancy Mace is the first of the primary challenges to the 8 Republicans who voted out former Speaker Kevin McCarthy last year.
I'm on the side of the people. I'm not on the side of the establishment.
Now Mace appears to be Act 1 in McCarthy's revenge tour, though he says he's not out for payback.
Are you on a political vengeance tour?
No, I know you guys try to say that.
McCarthy says it's not a revenge tour.
Oh, 100%. He's a mean girl. I mean, oh, absolutely. He's a mean girl. This is all about revenge. It's about powerful people that were taken out.
No regrets about that vote.
Never.
Mace is no stranger to intra-party feuds. Last cycle, her quarrel was with Trump. He endorsed her challenger, who she beat by 5,000 votes. Now she's back in Trump's favor.
Congresswoman Nancy Mace. We've come a long way.
Well, we've come a long way.
A full circle moment for the woman who called on her party to start over from Trump after January 6th.
This was an easy call supporting Donald Trump because we've had 4 years of Joe Biden.
Mace has outraised and outspent her nearest opponent, Catherine Templeton, a Trump backer and former labor secretary to former Governor Nikki Haley. She's widely seen as McCarthy's pick in this race.
I haven't talked to him about taking out Congressman Mace, but I have asked him to help me raise money.
Mace's vote to boot the speaker is why she's in it.
Like I saw you say that's when you decided you were running.
Absolutely. She broke our trust, and she did it by voting out Kevin McCarthy.
Still, she downplayed the former speaker's power.
All due respect to Kevin McCarthy, who is, I'm sure, a wonderful man. Nobody's paying attention to Kevin McCarthy in the low country of South Carolina.
On the airwaves, though,
self-serving politicians like Nancy Mace.
Follow the money, find the rhino. That's Catherine Templeton.
GOP groups in for more than $8 million. PACs tied to McCarthy, among the biggest spenders. Now it's a proxy battle at the ballot box where voters settle the score, one way or another.
We need mature adults, not silly girls. I want to win bigger than ever before on Tuesday night because I want to send a message to Washington that voters don't care about D.C.
And Vitali joins us now from Charleston. So, we heard from Templeton herself there, but is anybody in South Carolina paying attention to Kevin McCarthy? Does it seem like that's the case? If this is a revenge tour, did he pick an effective platform?
Look, at this point, McCarthy might be more a vehicle for getting Mace out of office. You're seeing specifically the way that groups that are aligned or allied with the former speaker are spending big on the airwaves here, trying to go negative on the incumbent, on Nancy Mace. For Mace, though, and in our conversations with sources on the ground who know South Carolina so well, the McCarthy vote could be both a knock against her, but also something that helps bolster her independent credentials. We know that conservative voters love people who go against the establishment, who aren't afraid to buck the grain of the party. Certainly, Mace going against McCarthy did just that. She thinks it could help her, and so do some experts who know South Carolina well.
So, if this is a revenge tour, who's number 2 on the list here?
This is the first act of the so-called revenge tour. And again, McCarthy might not think it's that, but we know the way that he talked about these members who voted against him. We know that these challengers also didn't come out of thin air. So next week, we'll head to Virginia's 5th congressional district. That's where Congressman Bob Good, who's now the head of the rabble-rousing Freedom Caucus, will face his own challenger, a state senator there who's actually earned the endorsement of Donald Trump. It's going to be a very different dynamic than what we've seen on the ground here in Charleston, where Mace has Trump's endorsement. She's a powerful incumbent. Good, on the other hand, is working against the Trump grain. He could be in some trouble, but of course, we'll see that next week.
You mentioned Nancy Mace having Trump's endorsement. There was a point in time when she did not. I mean, some would say, has a unique ability to sort of create some bad blood among party leaders there, including former President Trump at one time, and still survive. Does something like this only strengthen her hand, you think?
She has a knack for that, certainly. And I think that she relishes the idea that she has earned attention for bucking the establishment, for going against the powerful people that are at the top of the party. Certainly, it was something where you saw her with that scarlet letter A in the piece. That was something she wore and really earned attention for after the vote to oust McCarthy. That attention getting is also something that her critics are seizing on here in this race, saying that she's not in it for South Carolina voters. She's in it to earn attention and media for herself. Of course, Mace would say that she's still in this for South Carolina voters. She pointed to several different moments of constituent services, but that's really what she's trying to point to here. But look, on the Trump of it all, she is someone who endorsed the former president at a critical moment here in South Carolina. It didn't go unnoticed by a lot of people, including Trump, because now he's back in her corner.
All right, Ali Vitali for us in Charleston, South Carolina. Ali, thank you. Well, after the break, running on revenge, former President Trump lashes out against his political enemies and his criminal conviction as he meets with his probation officer. The panel's up next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. And welcome back to Meet the Press Now. Amid meetings with campaign staff, donors, and strategists, former President Donald Trump has another kind of meeting on his schedule today with his probation officer. NBC News was first to report that the presumptive Republican nominee is sitting for a virtual interview with a New York City probation officer today while he's off the trail at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Trump's legal team is expected to submit their sentencing recommendation this week ahead of his July 11th sentencing date. Now, that probation meeting comes after a rally yesterday in 100-degree temperatures in Las Vegas, where Trump condemned his guilty verdict and he accused President Biden of weaponizing the American justice system. Since that verdict, Mr. Trump has repeatedly floated the idea of using a second term to exact revenge against his political enemies, even as some interviewers gave him the opportunity to soften his tone. Listen.
You know, the word revenge is a very strong word, but maybe we have revenge through success. But that's what I'd like to see. I want to see the country survive, because this country is not going to survive like this. Well, revenge does take time, I will say that.
It does.
And sometimes revenge can be justified.
Will you pledge to restore equal justice, equal application of our laws, end this practice of weaponization? Is that a promise you're going to make?
You have to do it. But it's awful. Look, I know you want me to say something.
No, I don't want you to say. I'm asking.
But I don't want to look naive.
Joining me now on set here is Toluse Olorunnipa, White House bureau chief for the Washington Post, Faiz Shakir, senior advisor to Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders, and Sarah Chamberlain, president and CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Thank you all for being here today. Toluse, I'll start with you on this. My colleague Matt Dixon here at NBC News talked to Trump's former attorney, Ty Cobb, about this revenge rhetoric. We'll put up on the screen what he had to say about this. I think there should be concern. From a 30,000-foot view, what I see is Trump angrier now than he was before because he is convicted now. Is what we're hearing from the former president something, a message, this revenge language breaking through with voters?
Well, what Ty Cobb said is pretty interesting, in part because Trump was pretty angry during his first term in office. He was impeached twice. He had a lot of his policy goals flouted by the Democrats who took power and started investigating him. Now that he is a convicted felon, he is even more determined to go after his enemies. He's more determined to go after Joe Biden, the quote-unquote Biden crime family, and go after Democrats and prosecutors and people who have made his life miserable for the last couple of years. And so I do think that's breaking through with some voters. Some voters like that. A large number of voters think that that takes us very far from what a president should be, not only a convicted felon, but someone who's determined to seek revenge against his enemies.
Do we know who those voters are? I mean, who is that messaging breaking through with?
Well, you have a number of voters that have started to stray away from the Republican Party, Reagan Republicans, moderates, college-educated Republicans who like the policies, they like the tax cuts, but they don't like the extremism. They don't like the idea of, you know, a president going after his enemies with the Justice Department. And so some of those voters have started to stray away even before this guilty verdict, and they could be even more of those voters going away from him if he continues to use this language.
Sarah, I'm going to ask you to weigh in here. I want to play a little bit more sound, though, this is from the campaign trail yesterday in Las Vegas, the former president there talking about January 6th defendants. Let's listen to this.
We're going to look very strongly at J6. Those people, there has never been people treated more horrifically than J6 hostages. But those J6 warriors, they were warriors, but they were really more than anything else. They're victims of what happened. All they were doing is protesting a rigged election. That's what they were doing.
So Donald Trump has been a candidate for what, a decade or so now in one way or another. And so there are some people who may not be following day to day everything that's happening and everything that's being said. But what we do hear, when we do hear things like this, and we hear some of the revenge language, what's your impression of whether that's breaking through with part of the electorate in a way that's going to be helpful to him?
So it's certainly going to be helpful with the megas. I mean, they're more fired up than ever to turn out to vote for him, to send money to him. So that is working with them. The suburban women, which I would argue is going to decide this election, it's not really breaking through with them. They're kind of turned off. They don't really understand. So I'm hoping that Trump will start to appeal to them, maybe tone it down just a little bit, because as you said, they like the policies. They liked the tax cuts, everything that he did while he was president. They are going to decide this election. So it'll be interesting to see how this moves forward.
All right, Faiz, I want to turn to you and talk a little bit about President Biden here. First, I want to play some of Mitch Landrieu, the co-chair for the Biden campaign, on MSNBC yesterday. Let's watch this.
A guy that wants to be president of the United States first has to go sit down with his probation officer. That is just an astounding statement that sometimes people walk by. I don't think most Americans are going to walk by that. But at the end of the day, the president of the United States is a person who's supposed to have wisdom, character, judgment, and who's supposed to reflect the best that America has to offer. And when you put these two men next to each other and their vision of the world and their characters, in my opinion, it's not much of a choice.
And Faiz, I think that word character is something that keeps coming up, particularly from members of the Biden campaign, the effort to get the president reelected here. Who is that messaging for? Is that the right messaging to have out there as an effort to win reelection, this idea of character, or is it naive?
One of Biden's strengths for as long as I've been involved with his politics, I ran a campaign against him, has been his character conviction. People believe him to be a decent human being, trying to do the right thing, even when they disagree with him, trying to make honest judgments. And it is to this day one of the things that still, while Republicans go after him in kind of mean and vicious terms, it doesn't stick quite as strongly with Biden, because he's got a character of 40 years that people say that's a decent human being just trying to do the right thing. I might disagree with him, but it works to his advantage. I think sometimes what I would struggle with is he's got to speak to people who are angry and frustrated, who want to see a fighting Joe Biden. And that's where you see the Trump appeal to working class people who are angry. And when you're angry, the emotion that they're looking for is a little bit of, I'm frustrated. And that's where Biden doesn't always tap that emotion. Well,
I want to look at some other adjectives that have been considered when we look at these two candidates. Tolu, in particular, we have these new numbers from the CBS YouGov poll that looked at adjectives describing these candidates in particular. Biden has better marks here when we talk about being compassionate, better marks than the former President Trump. But that's it when you look at the list of adjectives on this list here. What's your takeaway from these numbers, from the campaign leaning into this idea of character as something that's going to resonate with voters and be helpful to them?
That is part of Joe Biden's story. It will win over some voters, but at this moment in our country, it seems like voters want someone who is effective, who is tough, who is willing to speak to the moment. As Faiz said, there are people who are angry over the war in Gaza, angry over inflation, and want a president who's energetic. And the fact that only 28% of Americans talk about Joe Biden in that kind of language, that is a very difficult hill for Biden to get over. He really needs to show more energy. He really needs to show that he's fighting. And especially as he goes to a debate with Donald Trump in a couple of weeks, he really needs to show that he can take the fight to Donald Trump. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for him to turn around his situation.
As you look at the campaign, though, and as you talk to some of your sources, are we going to see that? Is that something that is in the offing for President Biden, that the campaign is working on and figuring out how to message? I see you shaking your head. No, I'm going to come back over you, Sarah.
They have started to change their strategy a little bit. They have started to go a little bit more on offense. They have started to take the gloves off a little bit, not as much as a number of people want to see, but we have seen from President Biden, from his campaign, even going to the courthouse in Manhattan a couple of weeks ago and speaking directly to Donald Trump's situation. Joe Biden calling Donald Trump a convicted felon. They are starting to take the gloves off a little bit more. Whether that continues as we lead up to the debate, that remains to be seen, but I think that's something that a lot of voters are looking for.
Sarah, what's your take? I mean, you were shaking your head. Is it something that's not happening, or you don't see it coming?
So President Biden's not doing it enough. People are angry. That is why Trump is in a dead tie with President Biden. And what people see with Biden is he's not angry, and he's old. So if he could get fired up and show that he still has it, he might be able to get more people to turn to him. But that's why Trump is beating him. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. He looks boring and old.
And some of the times when we have seen Biden show that emotion have been some of his best, in particular the two State of the Unions, this last one and the one before. He came out of them with pretty decent bumps out of them, and people feeling like, hey, there's a president who's really fired up to maintain this job. I would argue that sometimes the staff around him don't let him do off the record or just general press interviews, allow us to see a Biden who is unscripted, who's off a teleprompter, who's giving you raw emotion and feeling. We've become, desensitized to like a Biden who has that. And I think they've got to bring that back in this.
They do.
But what about substance on this, though? I mean, does that mean people are less concerned about hearing policy talk and they want to feel something a little bit more from the candidate?
I would argue that one of the main substance areas that he's got to address is the economy. I mean, if people don't feel strongly about the direction of the economy and feel like he's not a firm hand on the steering wheel, then you got to tell them, here's what I'm trying to do and why I'm trying to make it better for you. Here's how I'm trying to address cost of living issues. Here I'm trying to bring down your gas prices. Here I'm trying to make sure healthcare costs are affordable for your family. But the way in which you communicate that substance has to be of a strength, of a desire to have this job for 4 more years. Every day I wake up giving a damn about fighting for you. That's got to come through.
I agree. Right. Or he'll lose the debate.
All right. We will leave it there. We'll all be watching that debate coming up at the end of the month. Faiz, Sarah, Tolu, thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Still to come, the far right surges in Europe and dominates elections in France, prompting President Macron to dissolve his own parliament and call for new elections. What it means for Europe and for the U.S., that's ahead on Meet the Press Now. And welcome back. We have election results out of Europe today where far-right parties surged at the ballot box, raising questions about the political trajectory of the continent. In Europe's parliamentary elections, a record number of far-right legislators won elections, although centrist parties are expected to hang on to the majority of 720 seats in the EU Parliament. In France, though, the far right won by a landslide, with National Party candidates getting more than twice the support of candidates backed by President Emmanuel Macron. Macron was then made the shocking decision to dissolve his own legislature and call for new elections. And in Germany, Chancellor Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats posted their worst performance in decades, with the extreme right Alternative for Germany party making notable gains. Joining me now from our London bureau is NBC News correspondent Danielle Amamjian from London for us now. So, Danielle, let's start with the European Parliament elections here. The center held, as we said, but we did see these big gains on the far right, especially as we talk about France and Germany. What can you tell us about this? How is this all going to matter?
Well, short answer, as you said, the center right holds on to power. So that's, it won't really affect the day-to-day. You're right, though. Support on the far left, on the far right. This is a message to the political establishment in Brussels from voters who are saying, your reality is disconnected from ours. What's on their minds? Migration, cost of living, inflation. It's not unique to one single party. But, European politics can be pretty complicated, kind of makes you dizzy trying to understand it. But located in Brussels, 720 seats, and you've got various political groups, which are sort of umbrella groups under which you've got political parties in every single country, 27 countries. You mentioned France. What a humiliating night for Emmanuel Macron, a crushing defeat. His party coming in with 15% of the vote. Far-right parties combined received 40%. That's 4 in 10 people in France voting for a far-right party. You've got a landscape, a reality on the ground that is not reflected in the parliament in France, and so hence his decision to dissolve parliament. It stunned the country, quite frankly, leaving experts, analysts bewildered. Some people are calling it political suicide, but he is daring the French people. He is saying, I dare you to let this happen at home. He didn't have to call elections. His position is safe until 2027. That's when the next presidential elections will be. But we find ourselves in a position where in just a few weeks' time, the opening of the Olympics in Paris, he could very well be next to a prime minister who is anti-EU, anti-immigration, stands for everything he stands against everything he stands for. That will certainly be a first in French politics.
I am curious. You talk about anti-EU and anti-immigration. I do wonder what it was that seemed to drive these gains for the far right in the European Union Parliament.
Well, they have over the years. I mean, like I said earlier, what was on the minds of these voters? Migration, a huge topic in Germany, in France, really, the cost of living. The farmers. Farmers are a huge issue in Europe. All these environmental bills being passed by Parliament. But as we say, big picture, centre-right holds on to power with gains on the far left and the far right. But
thank you, Danielle.
Not big changes.
All right, the news continues now with Hallie Jackson.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.